driven by the need to, again, as I said, mitigate the risks. So the first element was the build out of the SIPS network. And then in 2014, and this goes to the whole debate about reserve currency status. Just let me step back for a second, and then I'll get into your questions. A reserve currency and a reserve asset are two entirely separate animals. A reserve currency is what your medium of exchange is. This is what the US dollar does. The United States dollar is what, 90% of all transactions. And the renminbi is hardly any, at least under the SWIFT system. The reserve asset has historically been the US Treasury bond. And I think we all can see from the daily headlines that using the US Treasury bond as your store of value may not be the most appropriate store of value if you're looking to be able to ensure trust in the system. So this is where China in 2014, they opened their capital account somewhat. People don't really understand this, but they only opened it with two variables.
大家好，这里是华人看世界CN View 频道，我是今天的代班主持人布兰登·威克特。在今天这期节目中，我们邀请到了常驻上海的金融专家 Z-Ben Advisors 的创始合伙人彼得亚历山大。全球舆论场对于中国和美元的讨论正变得愈发极化，有人断言美元霸权即将崩溃，也有人坚信中国无法撼动这一体系。但彼得认为，这些争论往往忽略了最核心的真相：北京方面是否有意取代美元？中国构建的这套替代性支付体系，其背后究竟隐藏着怎样的金融逻辑？从2012年美国将金融体系武器化，到2014年中国开放资本账户，再到如今人民币在全球贸易中的独特角色，彼得将带我们深度拆解中国如何通过规避风险，在变局中建立起一套极其务实的防御性金融体系。这不仅仅是一场关于货币的讨论，更是一次对未来世界秩序重构的深度洞察。无论您是金融从业者，还是关注国际局势的深度观察者，这期精彩的深度对话都绝对不容错过。欢迎点赞订阅，看更多精彩视频。
Alternatives and what have you. Now, in the strictest sense, those are all accurate statements. What I think has been entirely missed in the entire debate is approximately just start with two questions, right? Number one, does Beijing have an ambition to replace the US dollar? Absolutely not. I mean, not even the mandarins in Beijing are looking to replace it. And I can go into the reasons why. But this is the more important element. Is Beijing attempting to create an alternative system? Absolutely. And this is what we've seen being, I guess it's been the better part of over a decade now that this process has been ongoing. But even when you get into that debate, there never is any real conversation as to why. Most people will jump to the conclusion that, well, because China is building this alternative system, the objective is that they want to replace the US dollar. Number one, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And there are two different elements to it which we can also get into. But the issue is about risk mitigation. Because if you go back and you look in time, China operates, and this is becoming, and I think this is fantastic, it's becoming more discussed, and you're seeing more news reports about what's called the China Interbank Payment System, or what's commonly referred to as SIPS. Mm-hmm. This has been around since 2015. And, you know, I've had to stress when I'm speaking with clients that, look, the program was initially not launched, but the PBOC, the central bank, was told you need to go out and create an alternative to the SWIFT network. Mm-hmm. And that was in 2012. And why does that matter? That was the first time that the United States weaponized the dollar system under the Obama administration when they cut, ironically or unironically, however you want to see it, they cut Iran off from the SWIFT network. And what is a little known element there is there's a very important Chinese bank that's been operating out of Tehran for years now called the Bank of Kunlun. And the Bank of Kunlun was actually sanctioned as an individual bank And what's also interesting, I might add, is that the Bank of Quinolone is actually majority owned by by CPAC, which is the China National Petroleum Corporation. So Beijing woke up in 2012 and saw that the United States had, as we like to overly use, crossed the Rubicon and was willing to go to such lengths as they were going to now. And people talk about the US dollar being used as a choke point. Certainly can be used as a choke point. I don't think it's a smart piece of statecraft.
I don't either.
But they can do that, right? And we've seen what's transpired over that. But the more important element is this has been a process that has been specifically driven by the need to, again, as I said, mitigate the risks. So the first element was the build out of the SIPS network. And then in 2014, and this goes to the whole debate about reserve currency status. Just let me step back for a second, and then I'll get into your questions. A reserve currency and a reserve asset are two entirely separate animals. A reserve currency is what your medium of exchange is. This is what the US dollar does. The United States dollar is what 90% of all transactions. And the renminbi is hardly any, at least under the SWIFT system. The reserve asset has historically been the US Treasury bond. And I think we all can see from the daily headlines that using the US Treasury bond as your store of value may not be the most appropriate store of value if you're looking to be able to ensure trust in the system. So this is where China in 2014, they opened their capital account somewhat. People don't really understand this, but they only opened it with two variables. One, it's opened on a gold account level, meaning you can transact in physical gold, and also really only at the sovereign and or institutional level, meaning you and I can't come to the Shanghai International Gold Exchange and say, here's some renminbi, give me some gold. But if you're a sovereign or a central bank somewhere else, you can act in that way. And it was these two, I think, these two variables that had come into play where China now is able to incentivize to a certain extent counterparties to use the renminbi. Because if you use the renminbi, and let's say you're a Gulf nation with a trade surplus with China, you can take that renminbi and you can now settle in physical gold. And that's been ongoing for years. It's just been ignored. So this has nothing to do with Beijing's interest in replacing the dollar. It's about making sure there's a system in place if ever the United States were to direct its full U.S. Treasury attention in that direction and say, we're going to cut off ICBC, CCB, all these big banks. They now have this interlocking network that is able to sort of move around and work outside that system with all of their trading partners. So let me just stop there and see what kind of questions you're going to want to pick away at.
So, I've heard this from and this is all very interesting. Thank you for that. I've heard this from other China scholars, which is that our sort of Thucydides trap mentality has been not quite well applied, that China is not seeking to become the hegemon as we understand it. And so in a way, first of all, do you think that is accurate? And second of all, when it comes to the money side, it sounds like you're saying that is correct. They don't. So first of all, do you think that China, though, does have ambitions for replacing the United States as the dominant world power?
Yes and no. And I don't mean to, right? It's, do they want to follow, let's look at the last two empires, right? The United States and Britain. And it was the projection of power through either colonies or bases, where you would have the hegemon operating within a specific locale. China has no desire to do that. What China's intention is hegemony through commerce, meaning that if you look at all of the commercial relationships and even diplomatic relationships that China operates, and I may have mentioned this on previous conversations with you, it is all bilateral. China doesn't do allies. China doesn't do formal blocks. Yes, they have BRICS, they have the SCO, but the way that China operates is to be able to say, look, you and I are sovereign nations. We can work together. And one of the interesting ironies, if you go back over the past week, I'm sure you saw the news that had come out where supposedly Donald Trump or his administration was going to come out and tell the world, you need to pick.
Yes,
it's either us or China.
Yeah.
Right. So, this is all very George W. Bush. You are either with us or with the terrorists.
Yep.
The manner in which China has very, for me, brilliantly navigated the diplomatic arena has been to go to even, let's say, we'll use the best example, the UK, where they will try to engage with the UK and say, look, we fully understand that you have a special relationship with the United States. That does not mean that we are your enemy. We can work together as well. So, you look over the course of all of the past 20 odd years, and this is exactly where China has tried to move. So when you look at the future of so-called hegemony, it is more about, look, we want you to be able to have full sovereignty over your national borders and your domestic policies and all of that. Typical China, don't meddle in internal affairs.
Yeah.
But there's going to be external pressure from the standpoint of commerce and economics. And we can see this playing out to a certain extent with the Europeans, where everybody is upset because of China Shock 2.0 and what have you. But China spent 30 years building a manufacturing powerhouse.
Yeah.
So until that relationship or that, the degree of leverage that China is able to wield over everybody else, that needs to change. Hence the United States looking at reshoring and what have you. But yes, China has hegemonic interests, but not in the same sense as we've seen in sort of Western cultures.
And that lines up with what I've heard from people that actually live in China and study China and speak the language. I mean, that's another key factor is a lot of the people that I talk to in DC who are hawkish don't actually really know China. The few people I do know in DC who do know China, they say similar things to this. And in a way, would a better way of
大家好，这里是华人看世界 CN View 频道。今天我们通过与彼得亚历山大先生的深度对谈，一同拨开了当前国际地缘政治与金融博弈的迷雾。在这一场长达数十分钟的深度交流中，我们不难发现外界对中国货币政策与战略意图的诸多解读，往往陷入了非黑即白的线性思维陷阱。正如彼得所言，中国构建的人民币跨境支付系统以及在全球范围内布局的金融网络，其核心逻辑并非为了在短期内取代美元的全球霸权地位，而是一种深谋远虑的风险规避策略，是为应对未来可能出现的金融极端封锁而预留的嵌入式选择权。我们必须清醒地认识到，世界秩序正在经历深刻的重构，这种重构并非简单的冷战 2.0， 也不是所谓的修昔底德陷阱所能完全涵盖中国在外交与经贸领域展现出的战略弹性。本质上是基于自身务实、勤奋且追求长远规模效应的文化基因。面对美国在金融体系上的种种动作，中国始终保持着极大的耐心，以商业合作与互利共赢的姿态，在复杂的国际博弈中稳扎稳打。这种以猫理论为代表的非线性思维，让中国在面对全球经济不确定性时，拥有了比传统霸权国家更为广阔的战略缓冲空间。回顾历史，我们需要警惕那些试图将世界推向不必要冲突的激进言论。正如节目中所探讨的，无论是对中东局势的深耕，还是对人民币结算体系的稳步推进，中国所展示的不仅仅是一个大国的崛起，更是一个在复杂多变的环境中寻求可持续发展与主权安全的典范。对于我们每一位关注全球局势的华人来说，理解这些宏观趋势比纠结于每日零碎的新闻报道更为重要。毕竟真相往往隐藏在那些被主流舆论所忽视的细微脉络之中。最后，感谢大家的陪伴与聆听，希望通过今天的分享，能为您理解当今世界复杂多变的金融与政治格局提供一个新的视角。 在这个瞬息万变的时代，保持独立思考，关注本质规律，是我们把握未来的关键。如果您觉得本期内容对您有所启发，欢迎点赞订阅，看更多精彩视频。让我们在下一次的深度对谈中再见。